Hey everyone, welcome to Tony for Linguistics 101. Tony for you. Compared to a lot of other RPGs on the market, Shin Megami Tensei is pretty unique in the names of the spells. Where the average run-of-the-mill game may call the fire spell, fire, or maybe flame if they're feeling crazy, SMT goes for Agi, ice is Bufu, lightning is Zio, and many, many more. This begs the question though, why on earth are they called these weird names? Well, let's dive into the etymology of these strange moves and try to understand a little bit more about them. There will be a ton of moves covered and an equal amount of speculation about them, so bear that in mind and feel free to let me know your thoughts on each one as well. Let's rapid fire out some of these names and learn something, shall we? Alright, first up, let's talk about the obvious ones, the elemental skills. Zio, Agi, Bufu, and Zan, but also sometimes called Garu. First up, Zio, the game's resident lightning spell. At first, what came to mind was Zeus, Greek god of lightning and supreme ruler of Mount Olympus in Greek mythology. This made sense at first, but I had to dig a little bit deeper. According to old Germanic text, the Nordic god known as Tyr was also referred to as Ziu, or sometimes pronounced Zio. This god's domain is air and war, with many believing him to be the precursor of the previously mentioned Zeus's counterpart in Roman myth called Jupiter. With domain over the skies, the use of his name for lightning spells is a surprisingly unique and extremely hidden touch. Agi, the game's fire spell. This one is fairly obvious. The skill is in reference to the Hindu god Agni. Agni is the god of fire, and whose name is quite literally used as a synonym for fire, so his name being associated with the spell makes a lot of sense. In Hinduism, there are many different types of Agni, from the fire we light to cook our meals, combustion of the elements, and even the fire of anger we use to channel our emotions. While a little obvious, Agi is much more fitting in this series known for its theological themes and subtlety than simply fire. Bufu, the game's resident ice spell. This one, I won't lie, stumped me for a very long time. After a while, I read online the best idea people have is that Bufu is a heavily edited down version of the Sanskrit word Ratuhinazarkar, meaning full of great lumps of ice. I really couldn't find much to corroborate this, but it's much farther than my own research could take me, so until someone corrects me in the comments, I'll just say the real reason is because Bufu D's nuts. The final of the elemental skills is Zan and/or Garu. Okay, I'll be honest, for Zan, I got nothing. In Japanese, Zan can be translated to slicing, beheading, or decapitating, but that's maybe a bit too unrelated to wind specifically. The kanji used in the games translated to simply the word than. I think it's safe to say that that means pretty much nothing. Alternatively, the word Garu is much more easy to figure out the meaning of. Garu may be a strangely worded version of Vayu, the Hindu god of air, wind, and breath. Or more obviously and more likely, an abbreviation of the name Garuda, Hindu god of strength and vigilance. Garuda is the winged mount of the god Vishnu, Hindu god of preservation. But don't let his status as a mount fool you. He is the great king of birds, and it's said in the great epics his wings beating can stop the spinning of the heavens themselves. Garuda is a very fitting god to have associated with the wind, much like Agni with fire and Zeus with lightning. Ice is the real odd one out, but hey, at least it sounds cool. With the elements out of the way, let's talk about the light and dark skills, Hama and Mudo. Hama is the game's resident insta-kill light skill. Hama is most likely an abbreviation of the Japanese word Hamaya, which is an arrow given at Shinto shrines as a lucky charm or even sometimes as a sacred tool to ward off demons. The arrow itself is blunted, as the concept of the practice says that the tip of the arrow does not need to be sharp to break and purify the evil spirits that attack the innocent or break the snare they have on the minds of your fellow man. Hamayumi is also a bow in Japanese myth, translating to evil destroying bow. Pretty sick, and is said to be one of the oldest and most sacred Japanese weapons in existence. According to legend, the imperial palace was taken over by an evil demon that caused the emperor great suffering. His court was at a loss as to how to help him, but just then, an archer named Minamoto no Yorimasu was summoned to the imperial palace. The archer drew back his bow and shot a single arrow, and with that single arrow, he completely destroyed the demon plaguing the sovereign. Ever since then, the bow was dubbed the Hamayumi, and the single arrow was called the Hama. With that story in mind, the name Hama being used for the skill that has the potential to one-hit kill the demons of darkness makes so much sense. Finally, the game's resident dark skill, Mudo. Very much unlike the previously mentioned Hama, this skill is much less interesting, but at least it's very easy to explain. Mudo means curse in Japanese. Yeah, that's about it. A curse spell makes sense to instantly kill an enemy, but it's no demon-destroying arrow, that's for sure. Before we get into the non-elemental and unique skills, let's quickly go over the elephant in the room. What's with the prefix ma and the suffix Rama and Dyne? Well, let's quickly explain them, since they're also quite easy to understand. Ma in the games denotes spells that hit all targets on the field. This is most likely an abbreviation of the Sanskrit word maha, meaning great. Making something great can mean making it bigger, so making the spell bigger and hitting multiple targets makes sense. Rama in the games denotes spells that are moderately stronger than their base forms. This is most likely a reference to the Hindu god Rama. In myth, Rama is the 7th avatar of the god Vishnu, the previously mentioned god of preservation. In this incarnation, he is human in most ways, the name itself meaning human. He took this form in response to others in heaven beseeching him to kill Ravana, a great evil king. He was born on Earth, and his entire life was chronicled in the Hindu epic known as Ramayana. I don't have the time to go over the entire epic, but essentially the story humanizes the god in many ways. Rama is a great and noble man who loves those around him, but is not all-powerful and seeks help from many people to achieve his goals. The use of him to symbolize a stronger but not ultimate version of a spell is a very unique way of expressing the story of Vishnu's human avatar. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I choose to believe it was a very deliberate choice. Finally, that leaves the supreme version of the spells with the suffix Dyne. Much like Hama and Mudo before, this one is pretty anticlimactic compared to the previous one. Dyne means power or force in Greek. Yeah, that's it. The strongest version of a spell is the one with the most force. Makes a lot of sense, right? Alright, let's cover the non-elemental spells, starting with Dia, the game's resident healing spell. In Greek, Dia is a prefix used in the formation of words usually meaning thoroughly or completely. Another possible explanation is the Celtic goddess of the sun, Dia Green, whose name means ray of sunshine, or tear of sunshine. According to legend, there was a king and a queen who ruled over the land when the world was young, a time when humans and animals spoke the same language. Brian, who was the prince of this kingdom, lived with his mother and father and all was peaceful. One day, the kingdom was beset by an abnormally long winter which dragged on for a great many cycles. They believed that the sun goddess Dia Green had been taken captive by the Lord of the Wildwood. The winter raged on so long that the queen had fallen ill and passed away. Knowing he had to act, the king sent out the prince on a quest to meet an old crone and do as she says to save the world, and along the way met a shape-shifting fox who would aid him on his journey. Eventually, the crone tells him to seek out a giant and steal from him 2 items, the bird the giant has as a pet and the white glaive. Neither of these capers goes off well, and eventually the giant is fed up with the boy, constantly trying to steal from him, giving him a deal. If you want my glaive, steal from me Dia Green. Do that or die. Not seeing much of a choice, after some time, Brian and the fox reached the Wildwood, where Dia Green was being held. Though this time, if Brian was caught, there would be no bargaining. Sneaking through the treacherous lands, he managed to avoid detection and found the cage of the sun goddess. Inside was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. After escaping, Brian met with the fox and they both lamented over the need to give her away to the giant to acquire the glaive and bird. The fox, however, sly as they are, offers to make themselves an image of the young goddess and return with the items for Brian. After 2 full days with the fox in the giant's home, the beast returned with his treasure in tow. Happily reunited and with their mission being complete, they went back to the crone's home and knocked on her door. They knocked and knocked, but there was no answer. Just as Brian turned to the fox about to ask what happened, the animal transformed into the old woman before his very eyes and stroked the newly freed bird. Shocked, Brian exclaimed how his father had said she would help him, but didn't know the exact breadth of her power. "Your father is a wise man indeed," said the crone. "The sun had to be returned to the land. I can usher in winter, and I can throw winter out, but I cannot control the sun. I needed your help to do that. Now return to your father's kingdom with the sun goddess and give warmth and light back to your people. and live happily together. Brian saved Dia Green from the giants with the help of the shape-shifting old woman and later wedded the goddess to bring warmth and light to the land once again. Why did the crone do all that stuff with the giant if the goddess was in a completely different place? Well, it was to get the pet bird. It was probably a way to teach him a life lesson, make him stronger as a future king, or whatever else. Who knows? It was a pretty cool story. It was also a very long explanation for the basic healing spell of SMT. I hope you liked it. Anyways, let's go over some rapid-fire ones. Makes sense. Rekarm is a spell that brings party members back from the dead, and is also the Sanskrit word for reincarnation. Staying on the Sanskrit language, I know it isn't an ability, but the extremely rare consumable found in many of the games called soma is the Sanskrit word used to describe the food of the gods, which they use to ensure their immortality. Fittingly, this item fully restores the user's health and mana on use. Quite the miracle food. Makajama is a spell that inflicts seal on your opponent, which is a status that prevents the use of magic. This one is interesting, but I think I figured it out. In Japanese, makaji can be translated as truth, reality, or without lies or deception, and jama, hinder, encumber, or impede. So put them together and it can mean something like hinder truth. This is quite fitting, since magic is putting one's own power into physical shape, their own truth, and the hindrance of that is the hindrance of the opponent's expression of their very self. Shibaboo is the spell that binds your opponent, and fittingly the word Shibaboo is similar to the Japanese word shibaru, meaning to bind. Makes sense. Tentarafu is the spell that inflicts panic on your opponent. The Japanese etymology of the word can be broken down into ten, meaning natural or spontaneity, tara, a phrase indicating a condition meaning something that is to occur, and fu, which as far as I can tell is a Japanese slang term meaning exhilaration. So, put together, it means spontaneous state of exhilaration. Not quite panic, but in a certain context you might call a manic person exhilarated for sure. Marin Karin is the spell in the game that affects your opponents with charm, making them not attack you, attack their teammates, and sometimes even give you free stuff. Marin is Japanese for sea or ocean, and Karin can mean a lot of things, but the one I found most fitting for this was in hiragana, where it meant flower bell. So the ocean's flower bell could possibly be a reference to the siren of Greek mythology, where demons of the sea would sing their song to entrance sailors, luring them to a brutal death. Very fitting. Now let's talk about some more endgame spells. Jihad and Mortal Jihad are pretty controversial skills in the games, and don't appear in very many. These moves deal intense physical damage to the enemies, and cost an equally intense amount to cast. Jihad in Arabic translates to striving or doing one's utmost. When taken by its base meaning, it's the struggle to overcome all obstacles in the way of good. With great struggle, any human can overcome the evil before them, whether it be yourself, other people, or literal demons. Megiddo is an almighty spell in the game that hits all enemies. Almighty is an attack type outside the regular elements that cannot be resisted at all. The name itself is most likely a reference to Armageddon. Megiddo specifically refers to a fortification made by King Ahab of Israel, but one specific passage uses the phrase Korma Gedahon, meaning the destruction of their army, or Har Megiddo, meaning Mount Megiddo. Specifically in the book of Revelation 16, it says, "They are demonic spirits that perform signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world, to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty. Look, I come like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed, so as not to go naked and be shamefully exposed." Then they gathered the kings together to the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon. Revelation is the final book of the Bible and holds within some pretty heavy stuff, not least of which is the war that broke out in heaven that led to Lucifer's fall and 1/3 of all angels becoming demons, as well as the very end of the world itself. The Battle of Kings on the place called Armageddon, Har Megiddo, is the battle that will end the world. That all being said, the spell in the game isn't that great. It costs too much MP and doesn't do that much damage, but at least the story behind it is pretty cool, right? Okay, to round things off, let's talk about some unique moves. Hasotobi is the signature skill of Yoshitsune, one of the best demons in the entire series. The ability attacks all foes 8 times, guaranteeing a critical hit on all attacks. This attack is a reference to Yoshitsune's appearance in the Genji Haishi War of 1185, where, according to legend, Yoshitsune jumped from boat to boat, slashing enemies as he flew by. It was said he jumped over 8 boats, slaying an entire fleet of soldiers himself. A cool story for the cool move of a cool demon. Isn't that cool? Morning Star is the signature move of Lucifer, which deals severe almighty damage to all enemies on the field. The name of the spell Morning Star, when translated to Hebrew, means Lucifer. Before he was the ultimate incarnation of sin and treachery, Lucifer was the bearer of light in heaven and minister of song. After a time, Lucifer believed himself to be better than God and more deserving of his title, leading 1/3 of all angels tempted by his ambition in a great battle against him. At the climax of the battle, he was felled by the Archangel Michael and was cast out into the pits of Tartarus along with his treacherous brood. Though he is still the Morning Star and bearer of light, he uses his gifts to send humans down a path of sin, ultimately leading them to the same pits he resides in. So essentially, Lucifer is casting Lucifer on his enemies. Freykugel is an ultimate spell in Nocturne and SMT 5 that deals intensely high almighty damage to a single enemy. This spell can be tied back to the German tale of Der Freischütz, or the free bullets. In this story, a forester named Bertram is the last descendant of the hunter Kuno. He wants his only daughter, named Kätchen, to marry a hunter and continue his legacy, but the young woman's heart belongs to a clerk named Wilhelm. Serious about his love, the clerk convinces Bertram of his skill as a huntsman, and Bertram agrees to have them engaged. All Wilhelm needs to do is pass his exam to become a forester. However, soon after the father's blessing, he becomes cursed to miss nearly all of his shots. In his sadness, Wilhelm meets an old soldier with a wooden leg, who gives him a handful of magic bullets that will always hit their target. Ecstatic, Wilhelm uses all the bullets to practice his aim, but when he runs out, the old man is nowhere to be found. Sometime later, Bertram tells the story one day about George Schmid, which catches the ear of Wilhelm. Apparently, a man living in Bohemia was sentenced to death for creating Der Freischütz, or the free bullets, at a crossroads after renouncing his faith in the Lord. 63 were made in total, 60 of which would always hit their target, but 3 of which, completely indistinguishable from the rest, belonged to the devil and would go wherever he bade them. Thinking he found the source of the magic bullets he used up, he attempted to cast them himself. All the ones he used hit their targets without error, so surely the part about 3 belonging to the devil was just a myth, right? Going to the crossroads and denying God, he made these 63 bullets and entered the exam. Wilhelm is passing the test with flying colors, not missing a single shot, as the story promised, except for the final one. Loading in a bullet, the same as any other, he fired the round and it careened directly towards Kätchen, killing her instantly. Bertram had lost his only child, and Wilhelm could not recover from the loss of his beloved for the rest of his days. Such is the price of dealing with the devil. An interesting story and a cautionary tale against taking shortcuts to success. Sometimes the consequences of your actions are felt by not you, but the people you love. The more desperate you are for something, the more you'll lose to get it. Sadly, the implications of this is that the spell is one of the most powerful the player can cast and has no downsides, either meaning the devil's will and the players are one and the same, or the player is the devil himself. Either way, it's a pretty interesting story for a great move. That wraps up my ability history roundup. Let me know which backstory you enjoyed the most in the comments down below, and while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Honestly, a simple spell like Dia having such a deep backstory really shocked me. I always enjoy the Celtic stories. Freykugel is a close second though. Special thanks to ZZZ, Andre Vinicius de Silva Valens, Arctic Mirror, Kalos, Kerhos, Goose Kebab, Jem Morales, Just a Middleman, Matt M, Not Catchy, Patty123, Paul Torrio, The Digital Dutchman, VideoGamer75, Zeba Neba, and many more for supporting the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to support, check the link in the description below. Thanks for watching this demonic linguistics lesson, and I'll see you in the next Tony for You. Have a good one.